Hello, my name is David Arnow, and it's a special privilege to share a few words with you for Chamah's virtual Gala. Rabbi Zaltzman told me a story. In 1974, he came from Israel to New York to raise funds for Chamah, and he asked around to find out who would be a good person to support Chamah in those early days. And he was told that he should speak to my grandfather, Jack Weiler. He met with him, and my grandfather told him to speak to his son-in-law, my father, Robert Arnow. And it was then in 1974, 47 years ago, that my father made his first contribution to Chamah. Then, in 1982, my father called Rabbi Zaltzman and asked him if Chamah could maybe use an office in Manhattan. Rabbi Zaltzman was very concerned about it would be very expensive to have an office in Manhattan. So he asked my father what the price would be and how long the term of the lease would be. And my father told him it's for free and for 100 years. So in 1982, Chamah moved into their offices at 78 Pearl Street, and they didn't stay there for 100 years, but only for 25 years. Unfortunately, there was a fire in this building that was owned by our family and some partners back then. Over those years, I had heard many stories from Rabbi Zaltzman in our family office about smuggling in prayer books in Hebrew to Jews in the Soviet Union, or tefillin. And he told us also about the work that Chamah was doing to support poor Jews in the Soviet Union. But we had never really seen any of this with our own eyes. We'd heard many stories, but never seen it. And that was all to change 20 years ago. On September 9th, 2001, my father, my wife Madeline, and I, and Rabbi Zaltzman traveled to Moscow for what was supposed to be a 3-day trip to visit some of Chamah's projects and to participate in the dedication of a garden at Chamah's Humanitarian Center in honor of my grandmother, Doris Weiler, who then was 99 years old, a very serious gardener, and still at the age of 99 could occasionally be found poking around in her flower or vegetable gardens. To say that we were impressed by what we saw of Chamah's programs would be an understatement. One of my teachers, Rabbi Irving Greenberg, used to say that because human beings are created in the image of God, it follows that each of us deserves to be treated with infinite caring and dignity. A few hours at Chamah's Rehabilitation Center and the Humanitarian Center made it perfectly clear that not only was this Chamah's goal, but it achieved that goal to an extraordinary extent. Let me give you one example of what we saw. At the Rehabilitation Center, elderly Jews who were poor, and poor means living on a pension of less than $50 a month, received hot meals, and they participated in social programs. For those who needed it, there was also a shower, a washing machine, and a dryer, and someone to cut their hair. 20 years ago, you wouldn't find things like that in many day programs for the elderly. In fact, after we returned from our trip to Moscow, we happened to be visiting a day program run by the Educational Alliance in New York City, one of the premier social service agencies in New York. And my wife told the people what we had seen at Chamah, and they said, wow, we have to try this. The idea of having a washing machine and a dryer and somebody to cut people's hair right on the spot was a new idea to them. So Chamah not only provides state-of-the-art programs, but it does so in a way that recognizes and enhances the dignity of every single one of its clients. And this doesn't happen by accident. It expresses the soul of Chamah's leaders and staff, from Rabbi Zaltzman in New York to Greta Ellenson and so many other amazing staff people in Moscow. The garden at the Humanitarian Center was dedicated on September 11th, 2001. With the time difference, that was 5 hours before the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. On the Hebrew calendar, it was the 23rd of Elul. The day began on a real high with joy and celebration, and even the blowing of a shofar, as it's customary to do every morning during the month of Elul. But the day ended in horror, tears, and anger. Flights were shut down, and what was supposed to be a 3-day trip lasted well over a week, which Rabbi Zaltzman was happy to fill with more visits to Chamah programs, increasingly distant from Moscow. Later in the fall of 2001, after we got back, Chamah had planned a gala dinner, but there were questions about whether or not to cancel or postpone in light of the attacks on the World Trade Center, the ruins of which were still smoldering. But according to Jewish tradition, if a funeral procession and a wedding party meet at an intersection, the funeral procession yields the right of way to the wedding party. So the gala dinner took place, albeit with a somewhat somber tone. It was important for Chamah to remind us back then that even in dark times, life goes on. After all, in Hebrew, Chamah means sun and also warmth. And as the book of Ecclesiastes and later Ernest Hemingway would remind us, the sun also rises. Now, 20 years later, we face a darkness of a different kind. But Chamah's message remains the same. Life must go on, and in times like these, Chamah's work becomes all the more important, not less. Our family is thrilled that we can continue support for Chamah's great work, which began so many years ago. And thank you all for participating in this virtual celebration of Chamah's work and for your support of an incredibly important and effective organization. Thanks so much to all of you. Bye-bye, and stay safe.